of Ithaca, where endless seas crashed beneath towering cliffs. Across the island, the memory of a great king still remained. Waves crash endlessly against the rocky shoreline, while olive trees sway beneath the warm golden sunlight. Seabirds circle high above the crashing waves as cold ocean winds sweep across the harbor. Fishing boats drift slowly through the water while shepherds guided their animals across the hills surrounding the kingdom. Though Ithaca remains beautiful, sadness quietly lives within its people. For many years, the people of Ithaca have lived without their king. Long ago, Odysseus sailed away beside the greatest warriors of Greece to fight in the brutal Trojan War. The war lasted for many years before the surviving kings and soldiers slowly returned home across the sea. Fires once burned brightly throughout Greece as families celebrated the return of their loved ones. But Odysseus never returned to Ithaca. Each morning, fishermen and merchants gathered near the harbor, watching the horizon and hoping Odysseus's ships would finally appear. None of the ships carried Odysseus back to his island home. Weeks slowly passed into months, and months turned into years. Older villagers quietly share stories beside campfires, remembering Odysseus as a fearless warrior known for wisdom, courage, and strength. Others remembered him as a wise and respected ruler who always protected his people. Mothers continue telling stories about the legendary king to children born long after the war began. They describing the legendary king who once ruled Ithaca with courage, wisdom, and the heart of a warrior. Inside the palace, memories of Odysseus still fill the empty halls. During the day, sunlight spreads across the cliffs while waves sparkle beneath the bright sky. Olive trees sway gently in the wind, and the smell of salt water fills the air near the harbor. Inside the palace, memories of Odysseus still fill the empty halls. Even the walls themselves seem haunted by the presence of the missing king. The people of Ithaca continue wondering what happened to their missing ruler. Some believe the sea swallowed him during violent storms far from home. Other whispers rumors told by weary sailors returning from distant shores. Despite the fear spreading across the kingdom, Queen Penelope refuses to abandon hope. Each evening, she stands overlooking the sea beneath the fading sunsets, believing her husband will someday return home. Though sadness fills her heart, she refuses to believe Odysseus is truly gone forever. Meanwhile, Telemachus, son of Odysseus and Penelope, grows into a young man beneath the shadow of his father's absence. When Odysseus sailed away for Troy, Telemachus was only a baby. He has spent most of his life hearing stories about a father he barely remembers. Throughout the palace and kingdom, the people constantly compare him to Odysseus. Yet Telemachus struggles with uncertainty inside himself. He longs to become strong and worthy like his father, but without Odysseus beside him, he often feels lost and powerless. Beneath the moonlit sky, he stares across the dark sea, wondering if his father still lives somewhere beyond the horizon. Though fear and uncertainty remained within him, anger slowly begins growing within the young prince as disorder spreads throughout his kingdom. Across Ithaca, uncertainty quietly spreads as the people slowly began losing hope. Sailors question whether the island will ever fully recover without its ruler. Servants whisper through the palace hall while villagers fear that the disorder may soon consume the land. Though life continues across the island, everything feels incomplete, as though the kingdom itself remains trapped, waiting for something lost to finally return. As darkness covers the island each night, waves continue crashing endlessly against the cliffs while stars shine above the sea. Torches flicker along the harbor and palace walls while cold winds move through the empty roads of the sleeping kingdom. Still, the sea continues, moving endlessly against the cliffs of Ithaca, carrying both hope and the sorrow across the kingdom. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, Odysseus remains separated from everything he loves, struggling to survive while his family waits faithfully for his return home. Royal Palace of Ithaca, burning torchlight flickers against the tall stone walls of Odysseus' great hall. Warm firelight dances across the long wooden tables covered with overflowing plates of food, and expensive dishes taken from the stores of Odysseus' household. The palace that once symbolized honor, wisdom, and order under King Odysseus has now become filled with arrogance, greed, and disrespect. Dozens of powerful suitors from across Greece gather inside the hall every day hoping to marry Queen Penelope. Clothed in luxurious robes and glittery jewelry, the arrogant men feasted endlessly inside Odysseus' home. Believing the great king would never return, they waste the kingdom's food and riches without shame. Servants carried nervously around the crowded hall, refilling goblets and carrying heavy trays of food. Half-eaten meals covered the royal table while laughing echoed through the palace halls. The palace echoed with music, laughter, and reckless celebration of the suitors. The suitors consumed Odysseus' food and treasures every single day, as the palace already belongs to them. The empty throne of Odysseus silently watches over the chaos consuming the palace. Some boasted of their wealth and power, while others mocked the missing king. The empty throne stood in silence while the reckless celebration consumed the palace around it. Once the throne Odysseus stood as a symbol of wisdom, strength, justice, and leadership. Among the noisy crowd sits Telemachus, son of Odysseus and Penelope. Unlike the arrogant suitors, Telemachus still respected the honor of his father's kingdom. He watches helplessly as the suitors insult his father's memory while wasting the wealth of his kingdom. And slowly, anger begins to grow within him. Though still young and uncertain of himself, every laughter, every spilled goblet of wine, and every insult spoken against Odysseus deepens the frustration grin inside the young prince. Meanwhile, the suitors saw Queen Penelope only as a path toward power and the throne of Ithaca. Queen Penelope remains trapped beneath the constant pressure of the suitors, who demanded she choosing new husband. Yet despite the growing chaos surrounding her, she refuses to abandon hope that Odysseus might still return home. The torches continue to burn against the cold stone walls, carrying a silent witness to the pain and corruption spreading throughout the palace. The palace of Ithaca no longer feels like a place of honor. It has become a kingdom consumed by greed, arrogance, and ambition. Beneath the music and the laughter, the shadow moved through the great hall as greed and corruption slowly consumed the palace of Ithaca. The great hall of Ithaca glowed beneath endless rows of flickering torchlight. Golden flames danced against towering marble columns while shadows stretched across the polished floors, like restless spirits trapped within the palace walls. The air smelled of roasted meat, burning oil, and spilled wine as the feast carried deep into the night once again. The suitors crowded around Odysseus's tables without shame, eating the kingdom's food as if they were already kings themselves. Laughter thundered through the hall. Some shouted drunken songs while others competed loudly for attention, boasting about their strength, wealth, and noble bloodlines. Goblets crashed together in celebration while servants hurried nervously between the overflowing tables. None of the men respected the palace. None respected the memory of Odysseus. Near the edge of the hall, standing silently beneath the warm glow of a nearby torch, Telemachus watched everything unfold before him. The young prince remained motionless while the chaos surrounded him. His dark eyes moved slowly across the crowded room, studying each arrogant face seated within his father's home. Though still young, Telemachus understood far more now than he had as a child. Every stolen cup of wine, every mocking laugh, every careless insult, it all wounded him deeply. The palace no longer felt peaceful. It felt occupied. Telemachus clenched his jaw quietly as one of the suitors leaned back in Odysseus's chair, laughing loudly while servants poured more wine into his goblet. Another man shoved a servant aside impatiently before grabbing food directly from a silver tray. Rage burned inside Telemachus, but he hid it carefully. He knew he was outnumbered. He knew the suitors did not fear him. To them, he was only a boy. Yet the blood of Odysseus flowed within him. Sometimes, late at night, Telemachus imagined what his father would do if he suddenly walked through the palace doors. He pictured the great king standing tall beneath the torchlight, his presence alone silencing the hall instantly. The stories of Odysseus had followed Telemachus his entire life. Warriors spoke of his father's intelligence during the Trojan War. Sailors whispered about his courage against monsters and storms. Even the elderly servants remembered the wisdom and strength Odysseus once carried into every room he entered. But Telemachus barely remembered him at all. Only fragments remained in his mind now. A distant voice, a strong hand resting briefly on his shoulder, a shadow disappearing toward the sea many years ago. Sometimes the prince feared he could never become the man Ithaca truly needed. As the feast continued growing louder, one of the drunken suitors noticed Telemachus watching from the shadows. "Well, look who stands among us," the man sneered with a grin. "The Prince of Ithaca watches us like a frightened child." Several men laughed immediately. Another lifted his goblet mockingly toward Telemachus. Telemachus lowered his eyes briefly, forcing himself to remain calm, while humiliation burned inside his chest like fire. Every instinct within him wanted to shout, to fight, to defend his father's kingdom, but something held him back. Fear, doubt, uncertainty. He hated himself for feeling powerless. Far above the hall, hidden within her quiet chambers near the balcony overlooking the sea, Queen Penelope remained awake beneath the soft glow of candlelight. Beyond the palace windows, dark waves crashed violently against the cliffs surrounding Ithaca, while storm clouds slowly drifted across the night sky. The kingdom itself felt trapped between hope and despair. And unknown to everyone inside the palace, another presence had already entered Ithaca. High above the mortal world, the goddess Athena watched Telemachus carefully. She saw the pain hidden behind his silence. She saw the anger he struggled to control.
The courage awakens.
But most importantly, she saw the courage beginning to awaken within the young prince of Ithaca. The scene begins inside the royal palace of Ithaca during the final moments of sunset. Warm golden light pours through the open stone archways overlooking the sea while burning torches flicker softly against the palace walls. Long shadows stretch across the marble floors and towering pillars as the kingdom slowly disappears into evening. Standing alone upon the palace balcony is Queen Penelope. She rests quietly beside the stone railing overlooking the endless sea below. The evening wind moves gently through her dark curls and flowing dress while waves crash against the cliffs surrounding Ithaca far beneath her. In the distance, small fishing boats drift across the fading water while villagers below kindled torches and evening fires throughout the island. But Penelope's eyes remain fixed on the horizon, hoping, waiting, searching the sea for a hope slowly fading away. Year after year, she waits for his return. Many years have passed since Odysseus sailed away to fight in the Trojan War beside the Greek kings. Other warriors returned home long ago to their families and kingdoms. Across Greece, celebrations welcomed kings and soldiers back from battle. But Ithaca never saw its king return. No ship carrying Odysseus ever appeared upon the horizon. No messenger ever arrived bringing certainty about his fate. Only rumors remain. Travelers arriving from distant islands speak of storms powerful enough to destroy entire fleets. Sailors whisper stories about cursed waters, sea monsters, and islands ruled by dangerous gods. Some claim Odysseus drowned long ago somewhere beyond the edge of the known world. Others believe he angered Poseidon himself. Yet, despite all the rumors, Penelope refuses to believe her husband is dead. Deep within her heart, she still feels that Odysseus survives somewhere beyond the sea. Every evening she walks to the same balcony overlooking Ithaca and watches the horizon carefully, as though one distant sail might finally emerge from the fading sunlight. Behind her, the once peaceful palace no longer feels safe. The halls that once echoed with music, wisdom, and celebration are now consumed by arrogance and greed. The suitors fill the palace daily, feasting upon Odysseus' food and wine while demanding Penelope choose a new husband. Even now, faint laughter echoes through the corridors behind her. The sound makes her lower her eyes sadly. Some of the suitors seek only power and wealth. Others desire the throne of Ithaca itself. They speak openly as though Odysseus is already dead, believing the kingdom now belongs to them. But Penelope continues resisting them quietly with intelligence and patience. To delay the suitors, she created a plan clever enough to rival Odysseus himself. She announced she would choose a husband only after completing a burial cloth for Laertes, the elderly father of Odysseus. Wanting to appear honorable, the suitors agreed to wait while she finished weaving. Every day, Penelope sits beside the great loom inside the palace halls, carefully weaving beneath the watchful eyes of the suitors and servants. They believe the cloth slowly brings them closer to victory. But every night, after the palace falls silent beneath torchlight and shadows, Penelope secretly returns alone to the loom. In darkness and silence, she carefully unravels everything she completed during the day, thread by thread, hour after hour. And by morning, the cloth appears unfinished once again. For years, her intelligence has protected both herself and the memory of her missing husband. Yet the burden grows heavier with each passing day. As the final sunlight begins disappearing behind the horizon, Penelope slowly closes her eyes for a moment while the sea wind brushes against her face. Memories of Odysseus flood her mind, his voice echoing through the palace halls. The wisdom in his words, the strength in his presence, and the peace Ithaca once felt under his rule. Below the balcony, waves continue crashing endlessly against the rocky cliffs, while darkness slowly spreads across the island kingdom. One by one, torches ignite throughout the palace grounds and villages beneath the fading sky. Still, Penelope remains standing at the balcony, still watching the sea, still refusing to surrender hope. Because somewhere beyond the endless waters and storms, she believes Odysseus is still alive, still fighting, still trying to return home to Ithaca. As Telemachus stepped away from the crowded feast hall, drunken boasting and cruel laughter still echoed behind him. Goblets crashed against the heavy wooden tables. Every sound reminded the young prince that strangers now ruled his father's home without fear. Torchlight flickered softly along the towering marble walls as Telemachus walked alone through the great halls of Ithaca. Long shadows stretched across the polished stone floors while cold wind whispered through the narrow palace windows. Outside, distant thunder rolled across the dark sea surrounding the island kingdom. Servants moved quietly through the corridors carrying wine jars, silver trays, and burning oil lamps. Whenever they passed Telemachus, they lowered their heads respectfully, yet none dared speak openly. The prince continued walking in silence. Though still young, Telemachus understood far more now than he had as a child. Fear had settled deeply within the palace over the long years of Odysseus' absence. Every stolen cup of wine, every mocking laugh, every careless insult toward his family wounded him deeply. The palace no longer felt peaceful, it felt occupied. At last, Telemachus entered the ancient throne room of Ithaca. The massive chamber stood darker and quieter than the feast hall behind him. Great stone pillars rose toward the high-shadowed ceiling while rows of burning torches lined the walls with golden firelight. Large bronze statues of forgotten heroes watched silently from the edges of the room, like ancient guardians protecting the memory of the kingdom. And there at the center of the hall stood the throne of Odysseus, empty, untouched for many long years. Telemachus slowed his steps as he approached it carefully. Dust rested lightly along the carved armrests where Ithaca's true king once sat proudly before sailing away to war. The golden details woven into the throne still shimmered beneath the torchlight. though time and loneliness had dimmed much of its glory. His father's throne seemed far larger than he remembered as a child. The young prince stopped only a few feet away. A storm of thoughts moved silently through Telemachus' mind. Far more impossible. He remembered the stories the old sailors once told about Odysseus.
Kings and warriors stronger than himself tried to take what was his.
How his father outsmarted kings and warriors stronger than himself. How he stood fearless before armies. How men followed him across endless oceans because they trusted his wisdom and courage. But Telemachus had never truly known that man. Only stories. Only memories. Only shadows. Doubt tightened heavily inside his chest. The prince slowly lowered his eyes toward the cold marble floor. How could he ever become the man Ithaca needed? The suitors were older, stronger, more experienced. They mocked him openly because they believed he was weak. Because they believed Odysseus would never return. A cold gust of wind suddenly swept through the throne room, causing the nearby torch flames to dance wildly against the walls. Telemachus slowly lifted his eyes once more toward the empty throne. Sharp eyes watching over Ithaca, unshaken, fearless, a king. For a brief moment, he imagined seeing his father sitting there again, strong hands resting upon the ancient armrests. The vision disappeared almost instantly. For several long moments, he simply stared. The throne remained empty, silent, waiting. Yet something had changed within Telemachus. Beneath the fear, beneath the loneliness, something small but powerful had quietly begun awakening inside him. Not strength, not confidence, not yet, but the first spark of courage. And high above the mortal world, unseen by every man within Ithaca, a goddess Athena watched the young prince carefully. For the first time in many years, hope quietly returned to the halls of Ithaca. Slowly rose over Ithaca. Golden sunlight spilled across the cliffs surrounding the island. But inside the great hall, the suitors continued feasting without shame. Wine spilled across the tables. Laughter echoed endlessly through the chamber. Servants hurried nervously between drunken men carrying silver trays overflowing with roasted meat and fruit. Near the edge of the hall, Telemachus watched everything quietly. The fear within him had not vanished, but something felt different now. Suddenly, one of the palace guards entered the hall. "A traveler has arrived," the guard announced. Several suitors groaned with annoyance before returning to their drinking. But Telemachus immediately lifted his eyes toward the entrance. Standing within the massive palace doorway was a mysterious, cloaked traveler, but Telemachus slowly rose to his feet. Though the hall remained loud with laughter and drunken voices, the traveler stood perfectly calm, studying, watching. Telemachus felt drawn toward the stranger immediately. Something about them felt powerful, almost unsettling, for reasons he could not yet explain. Several suitors laughed quietly as the young prince approached the mysterious traveler. "Careful, boy," one drunken man mocked from the tables. "The stranger may steal your throne before you ever sit upon it." More laughter followed, and for the first time in many years, the young prince of Ithaca stepped forward, not as a frightened child, the young prince of, but as the son of Odysseus. But this time Telemachus did not lower his eyes. The young prince stopped directly before the cloaked traveler. Up close, the traveler seemed even stranger somehow. Only a small portion of the traveler's face could be seen beneath the hood. Sharp eyes studied Telemachus carefully. Dust covered the heavy brown robes from long roads and distant shores. Yet something about the traveler's posture remained calm and unshaken. The great hall slowly quieted around them. Then, remembering the ancient laws of hospitality his father once honored, Telemachus straightened his shoulders. "You're welcome within the halls of Ithaca," he said carefully. "Please sit and eat among us." "The prince speaks like a king already," another joked. Many men lifted their goblets mockingly. More laughter spread across the hall. Yet the traveler never looked toward the suitors, only toward Telemachus. For a brief moment, the hidden stranger seemed almost pleased. For the first time in many years, Telemachus felt something unexpected. Approval, recognition, perhaps, even pride. Yet the traveler quietly studied the young prince. And though Telemachus did not yet realize it, the gods had finally begun watching him closely. Laughter inside the great hall of Ithaca continued long into the storm-filled night. Goblets crashed together while the suitors filled Odysseus's palace with drunken songs, careless boasting, and endless feasting. Torchlight flickered across the marble walls as servants hurried nervously between the crowded tables. Yet near the edge of the hall, Telemachus no longer watched them with the same fearful silence he once carried as a child. Something had changed. The mysterious traveler who had entered the palace seemed different from every other wandering sailor or guest who had crossed Ithaca before. Though dressed simply, the stranger carried an unshakable calmness within their eyes, as though they could already see the fate awaiting the kingdom long before anyone else could. The traveler spoke carefully to the young prince, asking about his father, the palace, and the chaos spreading through the halls. Telemachus found himself unable to look away. At first, Telemachus answered cautiously. Years of mockery and loneliness had taught him to hide his thoughts behind silence. But as the conversation continued, something buried deep within him slowly began to awaken. For the first time in many years, someone truly listened. The storm outside grew stronger. Wind pushed against the towering palace windows while distant thunder rolled across the sea cliffs surrounding Ithaca. The curtains swayed gently beside the long torchlit hallways, and shadows stretched across the floor like restless spirits trapped within the ancient palace. The traveler leaned closer. "You're no longer a child," the stranger said quietly. "The blood of Odysseus still lives within you." The words struck Telemachus harder than any sword ever could. For years, the suitors had treated him as weak, a boy standing in the shadow of a father who would never return. Every mocking laugh inside the hall had slowly poisoned the palace itself. But now, for the first time, Telemachus began wondering if Ithaca had been waiting for him all along. The mysterious traveler watched the young prince carefully beneath the flickering torchlight of Ithaca's great hall. Though hidden beneath the robes of an ordinary wanderer, there was something ancient resting quietly within the stranger's eyes, a wisdom far older than kings, storms, or mortal men. The traveler saw what the others could not. She saw the fear still buried within him, but she also saw something else beginning to rise beside it. Courage. Not the reckless courage of warriors seeking glory, but the quiet courage required to stand when no one believes you can. Telemachus was changing. The fear that had once kept him silent was no longer controlling him the way it had as a child. Beneath the endless mockery, beneath the loneliness, beneath the shadow of Odysseus himself, something stronger had finally begun to awaken inside the forgotten prince of Ithaca. Not pride, not anger, but courage. One of the suitors shoved a servant aside impatiently before pouring more wine. Another leaned back arrogantly while the others competed for attention like wolves. None of them noticed Telemachus standing taller now. None of them noticed destiny quietly awakening beside the empty throne. And beyond the palace windows, hidden somewhere within the endless darkness of the sea, Odysseus was still alive. The feast continued around them. The suitors laughed. They drank. They boasted. They treated Odysseus' palace as though it already belonged to them. But something inside Telemachus had changed. Kingdom one feast at a time. The traveler rose slowly from the stone bench and began walking toward the great hall. The noise of the feast echoed through the palace as they entered the hall together. None of the suitors paid much attention at first. To them, Telemachus was still the same boy they had mocked for years. The same prince they believed would never challenge them. But as he walked between the crowded tables, something felt different. His shoulders were straighter, his eyes no longer lowered toward the floor. The fearful child who had hidden behind silence seemed to be disappearing with every step. The traveler watched quietly. At the center of the hall stood the empty throne of Odysseus. Torchlight flickered across the ancient seat. Not speaking, not interfering, simply waiting. For years, Telemachus had looked at that throne with sadness. Tonight, for the first time, he looked at it with purpose. The storm outside began to fade. Far beyond the palace walls, dawn slowly approached across the sea. And though he did not yet realize it, the first step toward reclaiming Ithaca had already begun.